Hey guys, welcome back. So now jumping right back into New Mutants, to where at this point I am appalled to tell you they have been accosted and seized into the municipal ordinances of the Shi'ar Empire, of which they would wish to elude expeditiously. You dig what I'm saying? Because I am flabbergasted at, okay, let me stop. Man, I should do like a whole video like that. Like just talking like Tip for 10 minutes straight. But either way, jumping right back in, I want to talk about some of the preparations that these guys have made prior to, which helped things to play in their favor, but also may have left the Easter egg, pun intended, for something we'll see later on down the line. And not to mention a couple of these guys shooting their shot at some characters longtime readers haven't seen in a while. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch us builds every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping back into where you have the situation with the New Mutants, to where they were convinced by Sunspot to pick up the one member from the crew who's missing, Sam Guthrie aka Cannonball. And at this point, like in retrospective, we get a better look or perspective on how he had to sell the team the idea of leaving Paradise and going into Shi'ar space to save Sam from the clutches of this empire, to where he was being held prisoner, living this sad life and getting out of shape, and likely just growing into the shape of a cannonball. Which, to where you think about it, like this overselling tactic isn't too different to what Corsair pulled on them when he was downselling the reason why they had stopped at Benevolence. But with Sunspot choosing to have everyone hitch a ride with the Starjammers, who already have a sketchy history with the Shi'ar Empire, and with Corsair's like, we gotta make a stop, which is one of those things to like where you riding with some pirates and they say we gotta make a stop, somebody finna get robbed. And with the New Mutants like not figuring that out and falling into this whole situation, it really reminds me of that movie The Wood, where a bunch of high school kids went on a ride with some gangsters who was like, you know what, we finna stop at this liquor store. And next thing you know, they're an accessory to armed robbery. And I mean, like, the end result here was a bit different because the Starjammers, they just took off. Like, they instantly went into the bump them kids, leave them here protocol. And in this case, our guys didn't get off with a warning, they straight up just went to jail. But before we really even get too deep into that, we find out that this mysterious item that the Starjammers came here to take, of which all we really know is that it's extremely powerful and that's why it was being held at Benevolence. But as it turns out, when the Starjammers had ditched Bobby and the rest, they actually didn't get away with the artifact, but rather Rain had taken it out of its casing and hid it inside of Mondo just before leaving the casing alone for the Starjammers to take, which is going to be a nice surprise for them later on. But in the case for the others, getting locked up was pretty interesting because anytime a fight broke out, Ileana would just summon her soul sword, and whenever the guards would try to take it, she would just make it disappear. But then they would try to lock her up in solitary, but if they did so, she would just teleport right back out. And I know you're probably thinking, well, why didn't she just teleport everybody out of there? Which I'm sure would work to an extent, because once they got out, they would still have to like steal a ship or something like that. But instead, they just relied on Bobby, to whom prior to coming out here, he had lured up, and not necessarily because he knew something was gonna pop off when they got out here, but essentially with him being a millionaire, he was just making sure everything was in order because he wasn't sure how long he'd be gone. But in addition to this, with him being a millionaire, you know, he just got lawyers on deck, which is something that also played into his favor because a few of these lawyers also knew a good space lawyer who could be available to help him out in this rough spot. But in the Shi'ar criminal justice system, it doesn't really matter where you're from, which in this case gives their attorney nothing to work with, and these guys are like sentenced to life in a matter of seconds, which is rough. Like, it didn't even go to trial or anything. And I'm not necessarily sure if a jury would have helped in this case, but anything would have been better than just, you're in Shi'ar space, guilty. But when they're handed over to the guards, to whom they turn around and see it's actually Sam Guthrie, Cannonball, and his wife, Isabel Kane, Super Guardian, it's like a happy reunion and almost like free at last. But Super Guardian lets them know that it's not as simple as just letting them go, but they do have to sort some things out on Candelaire. But at the same time, like, this reunion, it's kind of bittersweet because on one hand you got Bobby, who is happy to see Sam, but he had also thought that Sam had just let himself go out here over the few months that he's been here. But at the same time, Sam rather pokes fun at him because Sam is rather doing well, and Bobby on the flip side is a convicted felon, to whom Super Guardian is kind of pissed at because essentially Bobby is to blame, because with this whole shenanigan with him bringing the New Mutants out here, getting them arrested, this had pulled Super Guardian away from her active duty, to where at this time she was supposed to be going after some rogue Skrulls who were laying siege to a CR outpost, and she had to come here with Sam because he didn't have the authority agree to take them into custody. And not to mention they had to get a last minute babysitter. And so now just for a bit of backstory between Sam and Isabel Kane, they've been together since like your early issues of Hickman Avengers leading into Time Runs Out, back when Sam and Bobby had just joined the Avengers. And at the time the three of them had worked together quite a bit, but Sam and Isabel grew closer to where not long after she got pregnant with Josiah, but not long after she had to head back to Candelaire, so Sam left with her, and that's where Josiah was born. But since then they have been back to Earth, but as far as in relation to New Mutants, Sam has only been out here for like a few months, since originally leaving, returning back to Earth, which I think at the time Bobby asked him to come back again. But when Sam left after that back to shi'ar space, that's pretty much where Bobby fabricated the story about Sam's wife holding him hostage and making it seem like he was there against his will, which at the end of the day I think that's really where Super Guardian's beef with Bobby really comes from. And so it like makes sense that she would actually hit him once she had seen him again, which I'm sure hurt pretty bad because like with the goggles she has like super strength, super speed, like x-ray vision, and so I'm sure like her punches really hurt. And as far as Bobby, like the last time I checked, he didn't necessarily have like super durability. But not long after this, Isabel gets a message from Guardian, the ruler of the Shi'ar Empire, who calls her back into service by giving her an encrypted message, which as it turns out will play into the favor of the rest of the New Mutants, and mainly because Bobby's recent lawyer fell very short of coming through of getting them off the hook. But as it turns out, Super Guardian calls for the help of the New Mutants while also officially pardoning them from their recent crimes, but in addition to that they have to go on this secret mission. And when this happens, of course they agree because essentially they don't really have a choice. But it's right after this where we jump over to Gladiator, who we see here talking to Zandra, and he lets her know that at this time that they need a Neramani back on the throne, to whom prior to this point the last Neramani was Lilandra, of whom prior to this point Lilandra Neramani was killed by Darkhawk during War of Kings when his body was taken over by Raptor, who at the time Raptor served Vulcan, which was pretty messed up at the time. But Gladiator lets Zandra know that she's needed on the throne while he's needed with the Imperial Guard. But it's here where we also find out like what specifically was Gladiator's secret mission that he had assigned for Super Guardian in the New Mutants. And as it turns out, they've sent to have her aunt, Deathbird, to return and be the new regent of the Empress and more or less mentor Zandra into her new title. But even with this, I wouldn't be surprised if she wanted this seat for herself, because even when we go back to Chris Claremont's Uncanny X-Men, back when Charles first discovered Deathbird's history by way of Lilandra, and as a side note, like Deathbird, she's always been a bit crass when it comes to communication, because back in Uncanny X-Men issue 156, she came after Lilandra, telling her to give up her throne, to whom previously it was Deathbird's birthright, being her older sister, but after killing their mother and their other sister, she was stripped of her name and she pretty much lost that. But back at the time when Deathbird came after Lilandra, Charles was like, Lilandra don't, and Deathbird was pretty much like, listen to your crippled boyfriend, which was pretty messed up. Like, how you gonna talk to Charles like that? But she, she killed her mom too, so like what do you expect for somebody like that? But essentially when the New Mutants go to meet her, Bobby is completely stricken, like he is in love. Like, man, who is that? I'm about to shoot my shot. And I gotta tell you guys, like this is why, like back when we talked about Ghost Panther and Storm, like when you meet these chicks, you probably want to do a background check, because little do you know, like they could have been exiled from a foreign empire on the grounds of treasonous murder. So just keep that in mind as like free game in case you ever swipe right on somebody named Deathbird. But so now when we get back to Gladiator, who at this time is meeting with his top two advisors, Mentor and Oracle, and getting a follow-up on the situation with Deathbird, to whom at this time they inform Gladiator that she's in transit. But in addition to this, Oracle makes the suggestion that this entire transit goes off comms so that word doesn't get out about Deathbird's arrival, of which Gladiator agrees to. But immediately after advising Gladiator on this strategy, she then goes to meet with the Shi'ar Death Commandos, to where with doing so she hands them a transponder to the New Mutant ship, to where at this point they're on their way back with Deathbird. But here when Oracle meets with the Shi'ar Death Commandos, who are essentially like your Shi'ar Empire Black Book group of mercenaries who handle dirty work that doesn't necessarily need to be tied to either your Shi'ar Empire Super Guardian or Guardian military. But she meets up with them here and gives them Deathbird's location, and with doing so she orders them to kill Deathbird and anyone else nearby who can possibly be a witness. And it's likely she's taking this decision into her own hands and taking it as an opportunity to kill Deathbird while she's a fairly easy target. But at this point, jumping back to the others, we get to Bobby, who's talking to Sam and telling him like, you know what, man, I'm finna shoot my shot. And like for Isabella, who comes in like towards the tail end of the conversation, she more or less just chimes in to tell Bobby that Deathbird is totally out of his league. And it's like, sure, Bobby's a millionaire and all that's cool, but Deathbird is the former Magistrix, soon to be regent of the new Empress, and Bobby's like, cool, I love a woman with some power. And for Isabella, who's trying to block so bad, she then tells Bobby that Deathbird has a kid, and Bobby's like, okay, might be more of a challenge, but I'ma still go for it. But what gets me is like he leads off with the millionaire thing, telling her that he's super rich and he buys small countries and trying to brush it off like it's no big deal. But then Deathbird is like, well, I'm not rich, I'm wealthy. I buy planets and it is a big deal. But while this is happening, and as soon as they jump through the most recent gate, they're met by an unmarked Imperial Death Knot ship, which of course is the Shi'ar Death Commandos who were sent by Oracle. And of course they don't leave with that announcement because they're here to kill everybody. But while they're waiting here, they type beam some messages, and I would say type beam is like your shi'ar version of Bluetooth. But within their message, they say that they're sending a single party on board, but even with doing so, this unmarked ship, they've blocked all outgoing comms, so they couldn't send out for help, but with their own comms, they switched to encrypted. But little did they know that Cypher was on board, and he decrypts their comms pretty much effortlessly, and when everyone is asking like, Cypher, what are they saying? He's just like, oh, they're sending 2 parties aboard the ship, and they're gonna kill everybody. Which is pretty messed up, but it does give them a bit of an advantage. And they put together pretty quickly that they're coming here to kill Deathbird, and taking out everybody else will pretty much be a cover-up. And it's like here when we find out, and at least I found out because I didn't pick this up before, but it's here that we find out that Magic is one of your Krakoan captains like we had talked about a while back in House of X. So essentially while they're out here, she's the leader and the law, but even still when she returns to Krakoa, she's still responsible for all decisions made and final judgment under the Quiet Council. But while they're out here, like she immediately goes into boss mode, and essentially with doing so, she gets everybody to split up within 2 teams. And really everyone except for Super Guardian and Bobby, who she tells to stay behind and protect Deathbird. And so when we follow Magic, who's taking on the first group, which is comprised of Flaw, the Death Commando field leader, who's pretty much a war scroll, Offset, who's like your 6-limb insectoid type, and also Hypernova, who was previously a guardian for the Shi'ar Empire. But so when Magic just pops up behind these guys, and really one guy, the other 2 are female, but when Magic pops up, she initially just flirts with all of them. And oddly enough, Hypernova's like the only one who's interested. But after meeting up with Magic here, she pretty much takes care of these guys, because not long after this, all of their comms go dark, and the Shi'ar Death Commander's leader, Black Cloak, he can no longer reach them. And my guess is she just teleported them out of there. But also when their commander, Black Cloak, goes to check on the second team, who is embarrassingly being beaten, because when we jump in, Wolfsbane is already done, and Karma, she's causing Shell to punch himself in the face, like repeatedly, until he eventually passes out. And it's like what seemingly was an easy target, it essentially turned out to be not so much. But when Black Cloak notices that his mercenaries are having problems, he gives the word to have the ship destroyed, with his men still on board. And with no further ado, the ship is blasted, and everyone aboard is just left adrift in space. Which is pretty messed up for Mondo and Chamber, because while all this was happening, they were just having drinks the whole time. And don't even ask me how Chamber even drinks, because if you ask me, like, that would be pretty interesting to actually see. And so now before I go, just want to give a real quick shout out to all the Patreons. Thanks for all your support. You guys are definitely a huge help at keeping this page going. And if anyone wants information on how to join us at Patreon, I got a link down in the description that'll give you more details. Just head over to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. We definitely got more to talk about with New Mutants, and we got a lot to talk about with like Dawn of X period, because we've been covering a lot of different stories, and now we're just getting caught up with a lot of Dawn of X. So if you're new here, be sure to subscribe so you can catch all those spills coming up, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.